Well, hi everyone. It's nice to be back and get a chance to talk in a somewhat different forum today because today we have a special visitor and we're doing this as sort of a Zoom interview. And as you know, we've just announced this amazing blue ribbon panel. It's made up of extraordinary experts in all the fields that are needed to understand what's the safest way for us to come back into service. And it's also addressing a question that I've gotten from so many of you over the past few weeks. You know, our inboxes are full of every company that we deal with, every hotel, every airline, every pizza delivery, everybody that you deal with is explaining what their protocols are to protect their customers and their employees from the COVID virus. And we have been pretty careful not to say too much. We've talked about why we want to raise our standards, and we've committed to making sure that we don't come back until we're absolutely sure that we've done everything we can to protect our crew and our guests. But people keep asking me, why haven't we talked about it? Why aren't we explaining the protocols? And the reason is we've been working on this panel, and I'm very happy that we have put together an amazing panel. It's co-chaired by Governor Mike Leavitt, who's actually with me today, and also with Dr. Scott Gottlieb. Dr. Gottlieb is a previous head of the Food and Drug Administration, and Mike Leavitt has been the head of Health and Human Services, which oversees the CDC. So we have two co-chairs who really put together an extraordinary team of experts in the field of all the fields that are necessary to us. So I'm happy to have here today Governor Leavitt, and I'll ask him to come on the screen, and I get to ask him some questions and to introduce him. So Governor Leavitt, welcome.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be with you and a pleasure to be involved in this quite remarkable undertaking that you have launched.
Well, we really appreciate it. I think it would be helpful if you told everybody about the panel. How did you guys go about selecting it, and who's on it, and why did you choose them?
We see the panel as a public health venture. That is to say, we're on a problem-solving mission to help the cruise industry figure out how to adapt to a new risk environment that we have never seen before. Now, of course, the cruise industry is not alone in that. The whole world is trying to figure this out, but we're having to learn how we can operate and manage these risks. And so we knew we needed to have people with long experience who had deep credibility with those who regulate the industry. And so we chose not just people who were subject matter experts, but that had deep and broad experience who could judge the adequacy of different measures and combinations of ways of adapting, and who could innovate and could see innovation when it occurred and were willing, as a result of their experience, to push forward and give things a try. And we're also supplementing the expert panel with a whole series of subject matter expertise from all over the world who can assist them in being able to assure that we have the best available knowledge in every category. So it really is as extraordinary as the new environment that we're operating in, and I think will result not just in assistance to the cruise industry, but there are so many other categories where risks that exist in a community exist on a cruise ship. And so we'll be able to use information that was drawn on restaurants on a cruise ship. Likewise, I think we'll make discoveries in this process that will be adaptable to someone who's running a recreation area off of a ship. So this is a problem-solving venture, and we have the right people to do it.
You know, I know when we started this, Royal Caribbean started out saying, who are the best people in the world that could lead such an effort? And we actually came down with two names. And you were my first call, and I was blown away when that call, and that was as far as we went. Could you tell me, I'm curious, what did you feel when you got this call from me out of the blue?
Well, I have to admit, I was surprised as well. I've enjoyed cruise ship vacations, but I certainly don't consider myself to be.
Who'd you sail with?
There's so many brands, it's really hard for me to remember. But going on, I found this to be just an extraordinarily interesting set of problems to solve. As I said earlier, this is not just about the cruise industry. I'm doing a lot of work right now, as you might expect, with my background in areas, for example, higher education. And of course, a problem there would be a dormitory. And someone said to me, well, a cruise ship is essentially, they said to me, a dormitory is essentially like a cruise ship, but it doesn't float. And I'm doing some work in the long care health industry and trying to help them through problems. And someone said, well, long-term care center it has a lot of similarities to a cruise ship, except it doesn't float. And I work with the retail industry, and the retail industry began to look at the unique problems that they have. And I realized, look, there are retail shops on a boat. There are recreation facilities on a boat. There are hospitality arrangements that have to be made, restaurants, hotels, casinos. This is a microcosm of many of the challenges that we face, and we could draw solutions from one and apply it to the other. And so I was intrigued as much by the intellectual challenge as well as the magnetic personality of the CEO.
Thank you for that. We really wanted to have a top team of experts, and you guys put together an amazing assembly of people. Could you talk a little bit about who you asked and what their reaction was, and who's on the team?
Yes, I probably won't go through all of the names, but I'll characterize them because I wouldn't want to leave anyone out because they're all very special people. But there are 7 members right now that are actively working. We'd like to add one more that would have another particular area of expertise. But the majority of them actually worked at the Centers for Disease Control in any capacity, from running major departments to actually running the Center for Disease Control. Several of them have deep academic interests in this area, things like ventilation, things like testing and sanitation, all very important subcomponents of how you deal with this new risk environment that we're dealing in. And so we put together this combination, not just because of their subject matter expertise, but because they have had long experience in evaluating ideas and being able to come to an understanding that there's no place in our society that you can say is absolutely 100% safe. We all manage risks every day, whether we're walking across the street or opening a package of food. There's some kind of risk involved in all of that. The idea isn't that we can eliminate all of that. The idea is we can manage it, and understanding that perspective and recognizing that it requires judgment to do this well. We looked for people who had long-standing judgment experience, whose track record gave them credibility, and who had some level of public health or scientific expertise or engineering that could assist in being able to evaluate new ideas and determine when we had actually done all we can do.
We've in the industry said for many years, we don't compete on safety or health. And so we've been very cooperative on so many things. But this is a little unusual because this panel we've actually put together originally with ourselves and Norwegian Cruise Line. So could you talk a little bit about that and how you see this developing and connections with the broader cruise industry and, in fact, the broader travel, tourism, and even other industries?
Well, one of the things that impressed me was the desire on the part of the two sponsoring CEOs, Richard and Frank Del Rio of Norwegian. One of the concerns I had was that the industry is a big industry and it has lots of different types of companies. And when if we were trying to solve this problem for everyone, with everyone's involvement, it could take a long time, and we may end up just getting the lowest common denominator as opposed to the right solution. And so the idea of being able to work with two industry leaders on presenting plans that they have to present in order to demonstrate that they're ready to sail was appealing to me when I realized everything we do here can be used by everyone and adapted to their own situation. So the idea that the industry does not compete on safety, it wants everyone to have these ideas, made this the perfect laboratory. Two industry leaders leaning forward to novel situations, willing to make every solution available to others and to draw solutions from everyone. So while everyone is not sitting at the table, we've invited everyone in the industry to contribute ideas because we welcome them, and we're going to do the same. We're going to give them every work product we develop because we want the industry to change.
Well, and we've been working together cooperatively throughout this period. So we each have looked at experts, and we've each learned what we can and each tried to innovate, and we've been sharing that, and that seems to work pretty well. So we're learning a lot in this whole process.
I'll just say I've appreciated CLIA offering to have an observer, the industry association, and they've been really good participants, and we appreciate that, and I think they value what we're coming up with. I mean, it's worth repeating the process. Each cruise line has a requirement to issue a plan or to develop a plan to demonstrate to various regulators that they have adapted to this new environment to assure as much safety as is possible. And the job of the panel is to populate the thinking of Royal Caribbean and Norwegian so that when they provide those plans, it's been populated with the best public health, engineering, and scientific information available. Now, we hope that other cruise lines will take that same thinking and incorporate it in their plans as well.
I think what we thought was so unusual about this Blue Ribbon panel, it's really an all-star. It's got the best of every kind of area that we needed to have. And I'm curious, when you and Scott went out to ask these people to join, what kind of a reaction did you get?
Candidly, I was a little surprised. They jumped at the chance. And it wasn't just that several of them enjoy cruising, though that was evident. One of the members said, yes, we've got to get this industry back at sea because I want to go back to sea. But I want to go safely was his response. And we knew in order to do that, we needed to have a core of people with general experience, credibility, and judgment that had been demonstrated, and that we could then populate the discussions we had with a lot more subject matter expertise. And we found that those that we called on were very interested in this as an intellectual exercise. These are people who have devoted themselves to the public's health for decades, and who have led and held the most senior positions in both public service, academia, and the private sector that's available. So I congratulate the sponsors for Royal Caribbean and Norwegian. They've made the resources available. They wanted to make sure we had what we needed, and I don't think we're going to disappoint.
So I have to ask, we've been working on this for over a month now, and you've set out that you think this is going to take till August to get your recommendations all together. What's taking so long? I'm anxious to get out there.
Well, this is a complex subject, and we want to make sure that we do what can be done to eliminate risks. we need to, in fact, learn to adapt to this. So we're going to take one quick tour through everything, and that's what we're going to do between now and August the 15th. And then we're going to present the very evident changes that can be made to enhance safety, that can be incorporated in plans that the various cruise lines will then submit to regulators. We'll then use the period of time after that to look at deeper innovations. We're already finding some very exciting ways to adapt technology, for example, to make it not only safer, but more convenient and to a large extent, a smoother experience generally. Lots of opportunities come out of change moments like this. And so we want to make certain we have the time to evaluate them. So we'll have a very rapid response by our estimation that will provide, I would say, most of the recommendations. And then we'll work for a bit longer to come up with things that I will reference as more innovative, things that need to be tested and researched.
And you know, this is very consistent. Most of the people who are listening to us today know that Royal Caribbean's mantra is continuous improvement. So we expect that we will come out with some recommendations, and we'll keep learning, and we'll implement those. We'll learn from the execution of those. We'll make them better. We'll find some things aren't necessary, some other things are. Continual innovation, continual improvement. That is our mantra at Royal Caribbean. And so very much consistent with what you're saying.
Richard, it occurs to me in discussing the panel, I probably left off one of the most important components of it, and that is the co-chairman, Dr. Scott Gottlieb. Many of those who view this will be familiar with Dr. Gottlieb. He spends a lot of time doing commentary for various news outlets. He's considered to be a top-ranked scientist himself. He was the administrator of the Food and Drug Administration for a time and considered to be a great leader there. He's a very thoughtful, clear-thinking man. I've worked with Scott for a long time, and I want to make sure that it's clear that the two of us are co-chairing this and that he makes a huge contribution that makes a big difference.
Well, at the beginning, when I told you that I had started out and we had found two names that we thought were the two best people in America to lead this kind of an effort, his was the second name. And what we found out was I spoke to you and we were happy with each other, and so we didn't go further. But meanwhile, Frank Del Rio was speaking to Scott. So serendipity actually worked. So let me ask you another question. There's been a lot of press about cruise lines. Is there a good solution to this? Is there an outcome which protects our guests and our crew?
Well, like all other forms of American recreation and enjoyment, our lives have been disrupted, but I truly believe it's temporarily. Now, that doesn't mean things will look exactly the way they did before, but if you're going to go to a football game, and I think we all will again, there'll be some changes. We have seen the National Basketball Association, for example, has begun to replay, and they're working their way back, demonstrating an ability and a willingness to adapt as they go. We're seeing almost all other businesses and forms of both intellectual and things we do for enjoyment that are happening that way. We're going to cruise again, and we'll cruise safely again. We're learning to adapt to this new environment, and the time frame that it takes to adapt for the cruise industry will probably be similar to what it is in other categories of life.
You know, and this is something that I've pointed out to our listeners here before. Adaption, innovation, that's what our business is all about. Cruising a year ago was very different than it was 2 years ago and 3 years ago, and it keeps changing. And I think that's a good thing. This may require a different kind of adaptation, but it's all very consistent with our history of constant innovation, constant improvement. So, Governor, let me ask you another question. We've talked before about protocols and what kind of protocols might be appropriate in the business. I'd like to ask a protocol question to you. You've been governor, three-term governor. You were head of the Environmental Protection Agency, director of the EPA. You were secretary of Health and Human Services. How do people decide which title? I mean, we could call you governor, director, secretary. Which title do you end up using and why?
Here's what I found out, Richard. I found out if you get elected to something, the title stays with you when you leave. So governor would likely be the one that would be used under that rule because I was elected 3 times to be governor. When you are occupying a title otherwise, for example, the Secretary of the United States Department of Health and Human Services, theoretically, according to those who think about etiquette, you leave that in the office when you depart, and that is, in etiquette world, is replaced by the title the Honorable. And so that was news to me. I've seen people use the title the Honorable, and now I know what it means. It means that they once occupied a title, and it's now been replaced by the Honorable.
So, Governor, you've been working on this. You've been working with us for almost 2 months now. Intense effort to recruit the best of the best. Intense effort to understand the environment and what's happening. You obviously follow what's happening in the broader world, and you're involved with many other industries. What's your biggest surprise in dealing with us so far?
No, I wouldn't say it's a surprise. I'd say it's an affirmation. I think it is affirming to know how sophisticated the operation of a major cruise line is in dealing with matters related to engineering and science and obviously hospitality. But I have encountered remarkable people who have deep experience and know how to apply it. I've also been appreciative of the fact that there is a certain humility about their willingness to learn from experts. And I both admire that and value that. This industry will be better as a result of this challenge. I think change is happening all around us. It's coming at a great cost, but at the same time, there are many changes. When I was Secretary of Health, where I got a lot of my background on this kind of thing, it was Scott and I and a handful of other people who were actually on the panel were responsible to oversee the creation of the National Pandemic Plan. We were dealing with a different virus that did not become nearly this serious, but it caused us to understand how big a challenge this is. And so we were tasked with, by Congress and by the President, to develop this initial plan. It caused me to go back and study pandemics literally for the last 2,000 years where there were written records of it. And there's a pattern here. And one of the major components is that it changes everything. If you look at the history of pandemics, you're not just looking at the history of disease. You're looking at the history of humankind, because it changes the economics. It changes the sociology. It changes the politics. It obviously changes that for everyone, because everyone is affected by this, and it's a moment where big changes occur. And if you look at major shifts that have come as a result of these pandemics, while they were extraordinarily costly in both human suffering and also in economic terms, they also were the initiator of wide scientific and engineering and sociologic advances. And I have little question but that's happening right now. And yes, we'll cruise again, and we'll cruise safely. We might cruise a little differently in the way we prepare for it and the way we conduct it. Life will have a sense of normality again, and result will be that we'll live in a better world than we were before.
And Mike, coming back to the question of ships and how they operate, ships are very unique environments. And many people point out to the difficulties that causes. But how do you feel about our ability to take that environment and produce something that's even safer?
I mentioned that occasionally when I'll work in another industry area and someone will say, like I had said earlier, a dormitory is like a cruise ship, but it doesn't float. What occurs to me is that, they might be saying, well, a cruise ship is harder because it floats. Reality is it's probably a lot easier because it's isolated. And I look at what's happening with the NBA right now, where they've consolidated all the games in one place where they could essentially create an isolation where they could conduct their business in a more controlled way. Well, it's become evident to me that the isolation can be seen not as a disadvantage, but as a great advantage. And one of the ways in which we'll adapt will be to utilize that as an asset, as opposed to seeing it as simply a liability.
And I think that's right. We've seen that when we look at any of the kinds of things we've talked about. We can do things with cruise ships that others don't have the capability of doing. And so I really, having watched the committee and heard some of the conclusions as it's worked through these process, it's really interesting to see how they're not just treating this as just another facility, but as something that offers unique opportunities and maybe allows us to do something even better. Governor, thank you very much for, most importantly, for agreeing to co-chair this panel. I'll say thanks to Scott Gottlieb at the same time, but also thank you for taking the time this morning to talk to us all about it. We're all very anxious to move forward, and having people of your caliber and the breadth of expertise to focus on this topic makes me very excited. We have been careful not to be talking about this before. I'm anxious, so it'll take us a while before we're ready to start revealing things. But the one thing we've always said is we won't go back until we're confident that we can do so safely and in a healthy manner. And it's clear this process will get us there, even if the time takes a little more longer than I would have liked. So, Governor, thank you for being with us this morning. And thank you to all of you who have listened in on us today. Oh, and don't forget, wash your hands. And now I'm going to add, the real thing you can do is wear that mask. It's easy, just do it.